Welcome back to the Raw Knowledge Podcast with your host. My name's Alex Connor, and of course, we're back with another guest. And this morning, I'm joined by Andrew Bogut. Thank you for joining me, my friend. How are you this morning?
Doing well. How you going?
Yeah, mate, very good. Considering this weather is very British at the moment, we're doing all right. It's not been the best of Australian summers, but hey, it's first world problems, my friend. So
That's
first of all,
right.
What was that?
Exactly right. Yeah, it is.
We've definitely had a few better ones. I'll start off as I always do. Andrew, a lot of people will obviously recognize your name. They're going to know who you are. But if someone was to ask you that didn't know perhaps what you do and why, how would you describe that? How would you preface that with someone now?
Former professional athlete. So had a long career playing mainly in the NBA, 14 years in the NBA, and then came back to Australia towards the end of my career to try to, be involved in the game here a little bit. And obviously family life highly impacted that. Once I kind of settled down. For those probably that aren't familiar that are listening to this, the NBA's a pretty brutal league. There's a lot of games, 82 games in a season, and we can be traded at any time. You can be cut at any time. So I always had a vision or a plan. My long-term plan was to have kids in my early 30s and then be slowly phasing back to home, which would be Australia, when they were about to start school. So the plan worked out perfectly, and they won the 5-year-old started school this year, and we've got a 3-year-old starting in a couple of years. So right now, with everything going on in the world, not doing a whole lot as far as being involved with the game or whatnot. I'm a co-owner of a minority owner in the Sydney Kings, so I'm involved in that on a weekly basis, board calls and all that kind of stuff, and strategizing and all that. But as far as what I wanted to do, be involved with some grassroots stuff, all that kind of stuff, I've put that on the back burner until all this COVID madness ends.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get onto that. Well, maybe we'll sort of bit of a divert first. What are your thoughts on COVID in respect to what's happened? Please feel free to share.
Oh, mate, how long do you have?
We've got. It's a bit like that, isn't it?
Yeah,
I guess.
Anyone that follows me on social media knows where I stand. Look, I understand that early on with this piece, a lot of people forget I was part of a grand final series in March of 2020. Sydney Kings, I was playing at the time, versus the Perth Wildcats, and COVID hit right in the middle of that series, and we actually forfeited the series down 2-1. It was a 5-game series. We had to go back to Perth, so we'll kind of, behind the 8 ball anyway of winning that, but we elected not to fly back to Perth and forfeited the series because of all the unknowns at that time, right? And I'd probably say that at the start of the pandemic, I kind of thought that the lockdowns made sense. The whole 2 weeks to flatten the curve, let's just let this thing die down. I've never been involved in a pandemic, never been involved in this kind of a virus in my lifetime, like most of us. So I thought it's new ground, unknown territory. So I understand what the government's trying to do. But within 3 or 4 months of it, it was clear that, this was becoming a bit of a farce with all the rules, a lot of double standards, all the hypocrisy, locking people in their homes. I mean, I'm from Melbourne, Australia originally, and what family and friends went through down there was horrendous. So I just started speaking out about the double standards and hypocrisy. And I said from day one that, I understand that there are people we need to protect in the community. Let's protect them, elderly, hospitals, the vulnerable. But I thought everyone else needs to get back on with it, because the ramifications of what we're not talking about will be much far greater. And we're seeing that now. We're seeing it mainly with kids missing 2 years of school. There's studies out of the US, 300% increase in kids with speech issues at 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, because everyone's wearing face masks. A lot of their verbal cues are seeing the mouth move. So I've read a lot of studies with this, and got a lot of shit from people like, oh, you're not a professor, you're not a scientist. No, but I can read papers. I can read actual literature on what's going on. Mental health, probably the worst time in the last 30, 40, 50 years. Going back to the world wars for mental health. Suicide rates are up, people losing everything, losing their businesses, domestic violence, the list goes on and on and on. So I saw the ramifications of that, and I was speaking about it quite early and copping a lot of shit for it, but that's kind of where I'm at on it. I thought, we needed to get back on with it pretty quickly. And, once our governments also take away liberties and freedoms and for the greater good of a virus, you're not going to get those back. and it's going to be a fight to get them back. And that's exactly where we are right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And some great key points. And like you said, I think a lot of people don't realize the multidimensional aspect of it. Like, it's not just about one thing, or, for example, people are losing jobs and work. It's this monopoly effect, like even down to, you said, people's speech, it's the education system. It really does ripple. And I guess one of the positives is with your influence, although you will get a bit of backlash, like you said, you can at least have that influence, because with, as the maxim goes, with power comes responsibility, or even influence, comes power, in terms of at least you're going to get a percentage of people that'll listen, where you can have that platform and say, hey, look, guys, regardless of what you think, here's some factual evidence. Have a think about it. I'm in complete agreement. And like you said, we could probably do the whole podcast and then some on there, but I think it's an important point to bring up nonetheless as well. I want to go.
No.
Yeah, we need to do it. It only spreads if we talk about it. If not me, who, and if not now, when, right? So it's
just a conversation too. It's not. I'm not always right about everything I say, right? I'm sure you're not always right about everything you say. We're not always right, but just like the fact that the conversation is being stymied is a big concern to me. Where you can't even have a discussion about, hang on a second, what's the mental health issue of kids missing 2 years of school? Hang on a second, what's I'm a professional athlete. So the most vital time of my career to jump from semi-pro amateur to pro was probably 15 to 17, 18. That's when you make your biggest jumps. I mean, you do a lot of work before that. So think about it. Kids in Victoria, in Melbourne at least, they lost 2 years of sport. So if you're in the prime of your career, no one talks about that. So we can't even have those conversations because you're a COVID conspiracy theorist and blah, blah, blah. But the fact that we can't have the conversations where you might be wrong is probably more of a big concern than even having, being wrong, in my opinion.
Yeah, I use an example of like a magician's trick of sleight of hand, which for anyone who doesn't know is when one hand is doing one thing and the other's doing something you can't see. Now, my interpretation is that a lot of that's gone on. And just as now, it's kind of emerged how a lot of, things have come to light, they've not been honest, they've been very disingenuous. We now have this, Russia-Ukraine thing going on. It was, oh, look over there. Well, hang on a minute. Let's come back to what's gone on here, because, now there's floods and there's people's without homes. And like you said, there's all this other thing. Oh, but we don't want to talk about that. Well, like you said, Andrew, we need to talk about it and we need to address it head on. So yeah, perhaps some really salient points there.
You know that.
In regards to your career, I'd love to go back to the start. And again, we probably streamline this in terms of what did your journey look like to the NBA? Are you someone of an athlete where, as soon as you could walk and talk, you were like, this is what I want to do. I want to play professional sport. Or is this something that, again, your sport chooses you based on, your skill sets and the way you go into school? Oh, you know what? I'm actually good at this. And now I enjoy it and it becomes a career pathway. I'd love to know a bit about that.
Yeah, look, I was always sporty. I loved sport as a kid, mainly ball sports. I wasn't too fond of other sports like swimming and like athletics. I was more like anything to do with the ball or when there was a strategy involved. As athleticism and strategy, I loved. So I did a bunch of sports as a kid. Australian was football. I did gymnastics, funnily enough, because of my sister. I got dragged into that because parents thought it was easy to drive us both to the same spot. Hated that. Did a bit of taekwondo, martial arts, and then I wanted to play basketball. And my parents were like, well, if we put you in a basketball, this is it. We're not changing sports again. Very expensive, fees, equipment, all that kind of stuff. They said, if you choose this, you're not changing again. And I was content with that. I always loved the game. I always put in a lot of time training and stuff at home, shooting the backyard. But it was just one of those things that obviously was going to be tall as well, which helped, but it wasn't why. It wasn't like a lot of people think, oh, my parents, you're going to be tall, play basketball. It was nothing to do with that. They let me play kind of what I wanted, what I loved. And I didn't pick it because I was tall. I loved the game. Thankfully, I ended up growing to 7 foot, which definitely helps. But yeah, and then I was never the star-studded kid. And I think that's what helped me get to where I am. I knew I had more passion and love for the game than all the kids that were better than me at a young age. I knew that for a fact. Like some were just more talented, early developers. I didn't have hair on my legs till I was like 19 years old. Like I was really late developing through puberty, and all the kids that were kind of the man childs were all, of course they're going to be bigger and better. And as I went through, I had to fight and scrap for everything, and got put in second and third teams at times, got cut from teams. And my journey wasn't textbook by any means. And I think generally most athletes have those kind of journeys that get to the top. They have to have some of those obstacles. And then, ended up developing really quickly in the space of, 12 to 18 months. I think I was 16 at the time, and developed really, really quickly. My parents got a personal trainer for me after school, picked me up from school, and we trained every day for an hour or two. This is on top of all my club trainings, all my other, things I had to do. And then got an offer to go to an Australian junior team camp. Went there, dominated, got offered a scholarship to the AIS, went there for 2 years, and then transitioned that into a scholarship to the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. Went there for 2 years, and then elected the NBA draft and went number one. So it all happened in a really small window. So I definitely wasn't that kid that was like, I'm going to be an NBA player at 12. Like, I thought, for me, a goal was just to play professionally anywhere in the world. NBA would have been fantastic, would have been content with, like, someone gives me money to play basketball, where do I sign? And then the further and further I went on developing, getting to college, it was like, oh no, the NBA is kind of possible. And then 3 months later, the NBA is a genuine chance. Then it was like, oh, late second round pick. And then it was early second round. Then it was late first round. And then it was like, oh shit, you might be top 10, and it just kept, the closer I got to the draft, I just kept getting better and better, and ended up luckily going number one.
Yeah. And like you said, it does happen like in a flash, and it's so competitive. You mentioned being a bit of a late developer and, having to scrap and building character. I'm always interested to know as well, were there any other, moments or events that, really shaped you as an athlete early on, and or any habits and behaviors that you adopted that helped you, continue that trajectory? Again, it wasn't bang, all of a sudden I had this natural gift, but at the same time, it seems to me like you were very consistent in your efforts.
Yeah, I think just put the time in. These days, I know they're monitoring even kids now with load management, which is arguable. I put in a lot of time away where people weren't watching. I put in time when people were watching. I still remember, like, I wasn't content if I didn't get a day's working as a young fella, and that really stuck with me. And I enjoyed doing it. But I remember going on a USA tour with the AIS. I was 16, 17. And, you go on these tours and you only have certain access to facilities because you're not at home, right? So, like, you might have a 2-hour time frame at a basketball court and 30 minutes in a weight room. And once you're done, you're done. And then you got to do team stuff. So you might not have enough time to do your individual work or your extra skill development or whatever. So I remember we're staying at a Ramada Inn in LA. I remember getting a basketball, I had a skipping rope that I packed with me, and I went to the underground car park and just worked out by myself, no hoop. Did ball handling stuff, did skipping, did some skill stuff, some passing against the brick wall. And I remember this car driving in and out, looking at me like, who the hell is this idiot in the car park, underground car park? And that's just an example of I didn't feel content that I was getting enough work in while I was on that tour because I couldn't get the work in, right? So that stuff, I was up out of bed 2 days a week before school at 5:30 a.m. I had 2 sessions a week that were in the mornings before school. Then, like I said, after school every day, I was picked up by my trainer, and then all my club trainings, then all the club games. So, they say, and I by no means mastered basketball, but to master any field, I think it's 10,000 hours of work. So that could be a mechanic, be a trainer, be a physio, whatever, to master it or get to a level where you're elite in your field is 10,000 hours. So you do the math. That's a lot of time spent on your craft. And I believe, that's most of the kids that make it, or make it to the pros have those hours pretty close.
For sure. And again, I don't think there's any shortcuts, especially in this stage with instant gratification. It's important for people to understand, it doesn't matter if you're really talented, you still got to put in a certain amount of work. With your trainer in the early days, what were the biggest lessons that he taught you aside from biomechanics and perhaps movement techniques, strength and conditioning? Was he a bit of a motivational figure for you? Was he a bit of a leader, or was it literally just someone who refined your technique and your skill acquisition?
A bit of everything. I think he gave me confidence because of the work we put in. So I think it just correlated directly towards, like, hey, you're working harder than these other kids. Like, you're putting more time in. you're going to be better than them, or you are already better than them. And it just gave me that confidence to when I go and meet these other kids like that either made it to a team over me, that I could just go and kick their ass because I had the body of work, the foundation that I felt confident enough. There are anomalies, there are talented kids and that just make it without that. And that's a really rare these days, but it does happen. They just have it. They just have the gift. Like LeBron James, for instance, was always going to be an NBA player, but you look at his body, he's like, if you built a basketball player, he'd look like him, right? But that's a rare specimen, right? We just put the work in, and he was from the former Yugoslavia, half Croatian, half Serbian. Like my whole family's from Croatia, so he had that Balkan mentality of losing his shit and kicking balls and abusing me at times and all that kind of stuff, which was good. I'm not saying it in a bad way, but just gave me that confidence that I truly felt that I had the body of work, and I think that's what really made me make that next jump of like Nav, like put in way more work than you. You might be the household name in Victoria or Australia as far as everyone knows who you are, because no one knew who I was. I popped up out of nowhere. But I'm still going to kick your ass. So that was kind of the biggest thing he gave me, was that confidence, that push of like, you've done the work.
Yeah, it's important to have these people in the early stages. They generally mold us, not always make or break, but it is fascinating to me the people we surround ourselves with in general, but even in the early days of that journey. So moving on, the NBA, can you describe to us how you felt when you got announced or when you got chosen to be part of the NBA? And maybe for people who, are unaware, they've never competed or they've not been on a stage, what does that feel like when you stepped out on the NBA? Was it, this is now just another game? Or was there another feeling? Was there a different presence stepping on the court with those elite athletes, in that arena with the people, with the crowd? I imagine it's pretty invigorating.
Yeah, look, there's pros and cons. Like going number one, I set history. It was the first Australian ever to go number one in NBA draft history, and obviously a few have done it since then. Ben Simmons, Kyrie, you can kind of count as Australian because he was born here, but he's probably more American, playing for the Team USA and whatnot. But yeah, I think that was definitely an emotional moment, just knowing everything that I went through my journey, the ups and downs, the roller coaster ride of juniors. And, I was told it numerous times, you've got an attitude problem, you're never going to make it, blah, blah, blah. And I just couldn't, I couldn't kind of convey my passion for the game always positively. I'd show on my face. Like if someone was on the team was not playing team basketball or coach was playing favorites, you could tell I was pissed off at 12, 13, 14. And that's taboo in Australian culture. Like, oh, look at that kid, he's got a bad attitude. It's like, well, no one really, as a coach, your job is I want those kids 10 times out of 10, right? I want that kid because I know that they're passionate about it. If I can just get them back on the tracks, sometimes I went off track sometimes, I'm not going to lie, but if you can get a coach that can get you back in line, take that kid 10 times out of 10, rather than the kid that are going to be like, come on, mate, like we have to go work. Come on. Constantly doing that as a coach is way worse. So I'd rather the once a fortnight blow up where you're like, this kid's gone off the rails, got to put him back on, than every day having to tell someone, come on, we got to do the work. So getting pick number one was all that work. So I was emotional, but then, 2 or 3 days after that, I'm like, I got a target on my back now. Like I got guys, American guys in college, whatever, that are pissed off that I went one. Everyone's trying to kick my ass. So I always had that kind of mentality that I got to kind of, go out there and be ready to fight a lot. And that's exactly what it was like the first couple of years. Guys are going to test you, give you cheap shots, try to hit you, see what you're made of, all that, and just see what you really like and see if you're going to fold. And I've seen, a lot of guys, be out of the league in a couple of years that have been high picks because of that. And I've seen a lot of guys excel the other way. So it's kind of a tricky one. You want to enjoy it, but you don't want to enjoy it too much because at the end of the day, you haven't played a game yet.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah, easy to get lost in the moment. And like you said, a lot of pressure there as well to be on that platform. What are some of, the misconceptions you think maybe people have about not just the NBA, but even playing at that level? You mentioned some things there, what goes on behind closed doors. I know there's a few series now, but, it's TV at the end of the day. For example, one of my main passions is Formula One. We've got Daniel Ricciardo on there now, and, we're seeing behind the scenes of Netflix. And now that isn't always true because we know how people like to cut and edit things together for entertainment. But what are some things that people wouldn't expect about the NBA that you experienced that maybe shocked you, not in a bad way, could be, but also in a good way. Like, for example, it could have been the way the team was run. It could have been the way you were looked after between games, things like that, that people just are completely oblivious to, that perhaps watch the game and should know. Just a quick one, guys, before we carry on with the podcast. For any of you who are interested in taking your health and physique to the next level, and you want to remove the guesswork, you're not quite getting the progress that you want, you're not seeing what you want to see in the mirror, and you're not feeling like you're really moving in the right direction, then click the link in the bio below, the apply button, where you can contact me. We can organize a free consultation, no obligation, and discover whether it's a good fit as coach and client. All right, back to it.
Oh, laundry list, man. There's so much. Look, they do look after us very well. We fly charter everywhere. They really take care of us. Most teams do. Some teams cheap out a little bit, but it's still a pretty good level. But some teams, like Golden State, when I was there, was phenomenal. The best food money can buy after games, cater to the best restaurant on the road. We stay at the best hotels, chartered flights, physios, masseuses, whatever you want, they'll take care of. So the level of care is amazing. They really try to make sure that you're taken care of and that you don't have any worries outside of show up to training, train hard and play hard at games. But I think the biggest negative is just the business of basketball. You hear it all the time. It is a business, and it's cutthroat. As soon as you're past your use-by date, generally, there's a few anomalies that might get a pass if they're absolute legends, but generally they're going to spit you out as quickly as you can and move you on for someone better or someone half better or better prospect, and that's just the reality of it. So you kind of, those relationships with people can be hindered a little bit because you've got a coach telling you they love you, or a GM, you're our guy, and then you might do your knee, or you might get hurt, or you might be out of form, and then a year later you're gone. So then you're like, hang on a second, was that relationship really there? Were they just telling me that because I was playing well at the time? And a lot of times the answer is yes. And you just got to understand that's just a part of how brutal the industry is. And you see a lot of players get caught off guard by it. And it can be emotionally tolling for people that thought someone was their really good friend and then they knifed him, or they cut him, or they trade him, or, the unfortunate reality of our business is that there might be a backup to me on the roster that's like, I do my knee and they're like, oh, that sucks, mate. But deep down they're happy because they're like, now I'm going to move up in the rotation. I'm going to get minutes. This is within a team, points, rebounds. There's times where guys on the same team fight for rebounds because if I get three, 4 more rebounds a game, that's an extra $1 million, So the business of basketball really takes away from the beauty of the game. And that was probably the hardest thing for me to kind of adapt to, coming from Australia, where it's team culture first, and just the way I played wasn't so much about stats. It was more about what I need to do to help my team win. And that was probably the biggest adjustment for me.
Cutthroat indeed. And I was actually having a conversation to a friend about this on the weekend. And I talked about, for example, the simplicity of life and how humans have complicated it with finance. Like, for example, we take a game of basketball. The goal is to get that ball in the opposition's hoop. That is obviously very simply said. It's a lot harder to do. But then we throw in money. We throw in sponsorships, right? We throw in teams, incentives. We throw in favoritisms. We throw in racism, all of these things. And now it's this, unfortunately, like you said, it's not the team culture that perhaps we played for. But as you rightly said, and I think a lot of leaders that I follow, whether it's in Formula One teams, whether it's in the NBA, whether it's in, the FA Premier League, it's really interesting. They talk about, they're like, look, we cannot lose sight that this is a business, and not in a negative way, but it's like, we have to understand that, unfortunately, we are here to be paid, or to pay. And, at the end of the day, a job's got to get done. And obviously a lot of things rely on this. I have a few clients who work in the betting sphere. It's unreal, the amount of money that goes through on betting on sport. I knew it was a lot, but it's pretty uncanny. Andrew, I'm really interested as a strength and nutrition coach, what the nutrition and the training was like behind the scenes and what support you got. I had a friend on that was playing, in professional rugby. And I was quite shocked sometimes at the lack of support he got within nutrition. Like, for example, it was very vague and it was like, oh yeah, you kind of do this, kind of do that. I imagine it's a lot better in the NBA to a degree. Can you maybe chat to us about what support you had within the realms of nutrition and training, and how structured was it? And did you feel that you got everything you needed, apart from, obviously, you talked about before, you got the resources, but did you get the education?
It's changed a lot. From when I first came in the league, it was next to none. And look, NBA players are a little bit different. The way the NBA works, even still to this day, is it's up to the individual. The club will provide it, but the club's not going to overly press it on you, because guys are going to do what they want to do, right? When I first came in, there wasn't really a presence on nutrition. Even some of the recovery stuff was a decade behind what we're doing in Australia, as far as treatment protocol and recovery and all that kind of stuff. Whereas they've jumped massively the last probably 10 years. When I first came in the league in 2005, it wasn't great. But yeah, they do now. They do multivitamins, shakes. They'll try to put guys on diets, but it's not like the AFL or the NRL where they force you to do it. It's still up to the individual. If he wants to go and eat that cheeseburger, they're not going to stop an NBA player making $30 million a year eating a cheeseburger, right? So what I learned was, everything in moderation. Like I had cheat days, so you still got to enjoy it. I still had my burger and fries once a week, and we were burning a lot of calories, so we could afford to do that. But if you're doing it every day, that's what I tell people all the time. Like, it's people go on these diets and everything. I'm like, you don't necessarily need to go on just a crazy diet. Just modify a little bit of what you're doing. So you don't want to take complete enjoyment out of your life. So if you're, just don't get the side of Coke with the burger. Maybe cut that out to start. Start small, right? Maybe you don't get the side of fries, have the burger, and then maybe you get to a point where you don't have the bread. You have just a lettuce instead of the bread. Like this, do it slowly. I find the people that, especially athletes, where they just try to cold turkey them off their diet completely, they're going to eventually relapse and just like have a day where they eat, 6 cheeseburgers and 30 nuggets. I've seen it. I've dead set seen it. So yeah, look, I mean, they supported it. Me personally, I was big on hydration. I always have a water bottle with me everywhere I go. I'm in a car right now, would have 3 or 4 water bottles in it. On the road, I'd always take water bottles off the plane with us into the hotel room and just be constantly drinking water and just making sure I was hydrated. I was big on pasta and protein before games, or some sort of rice. And I'd stay away from certain things. So before games, I'd stay away from like anything chili or anything that's going to upset your stomach or give you some indigestion, possibly anything overly creamy. Try to stay away from that. Obviously, French fries and all that. But look, on the flip side, I've seen guys in the locker room literally eating a crispy chicken burger with fries 40 minutes before tip off and go out and play like nothing happened. And if that was me, I need to have a nap and I'd be useless in the game. But some guys grew up differently. Some guys grew up with that, getting a quick meal in on the way to a game as a kid, and they're used to that, right? Whereas, everyone's different. But yeah, I mean, it's changed a lot, but it still comes down to being up to the individual.
Yeah, for sure. You made some good points, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions. I know one of my biggest, sort of realizations with studying nutrition and then working with athletes was, you're working with people at the end of the day. And as you said, you're burning a lot of calories. There's nothing wrong with, having these more rich foods. And a lot of the time, the guys and the girls after the game, we actually go for those things. We get them on the burgers, we get them on the chips, because we replenish calories. It gives them something enjoyable. Plus, you don't want to be sitting down eating a big bowl of mashed potato and, dry chicken. And as you said, Andrew, it's got to be sustainable and enjoyable. And, having a drink, having a bit of this, moderation in is key. And as you said there, hydration, probably one of the key things I think people leave on the table, especially as an athlete. You're losing so much electrolytes through your sweat. So you just need to get that in at the end of the day. In the NBA, did you make any, really meaningful relationships, any friends, or was there anyone in particular, player side, that inspired you the most? Or is it, as you mentioned before, to the point where you keep people at arm's length because you don't know if they're going to jab you in the back, and there's all of that going on? But I'm sure you've probably made some good friends that are actually genuine people.
Yeah, no doubt. But it's not. I've played with teams of 15 odd players for 15 years, and I've probably only got 2 handfuls of guys that are genuinely keep, probably a little bit more, maybe 15 odd guys that I send a text every now and then and catch up with. And then out of those 15, there's probably 4 or 5 that will always catch up when we're in town. So it's a small group for me. I think most players are very similar. They generally bond with a couple of guys and they keep it pretty close. But yeah, I mean, it is interesting. Especially when you're out of the league, it's hard because you understand when guys are in the league, they're so busy that it's hard for them to sometimes get back to you or whatever. But I've kept in touch. I mean, Harrison Barnes is still a really, really good friend of mine. Talked to him a fair bit. Leandro Barbosa, really a Brazilian guy, really, really kind of happy being, always smiling, fun guy to be around. But there's a number of guys. Carlos Delfino, who's from Argentina, I keep in touch with him. So there's a few guys, but haven't seen a bunch of them because everything going on in the world. I haven't been over the States in a while, but we keep in touch and we all played for our national teams as well. So we'd catch up at tournaments and whatever. But yeah, it's not as big a group as you'd think, but it's not a smaller group neither. So it's a good balance. And there's coaches and GMs I still keep in touch with as well, front office people. And yeah, it's I think it's good just to see where people are after a couple of years as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's important to keep those relationships strong, especially now, that you're giving back, if you like, in the coaching sphere. Were there any players growing up that you idolized or looked to for inspiration, or maybe some big names or maybe some names that weren't as prevalent in the industry?
Yeah, for me, it was being of Croatian heritage, was Tony Kukoc. So he played for Chicago Bulls with Michael Jordan back in the day, and one of the greatest Croatian players or European players of all time. Just got inducted into the Hall of Fame, actually, Basketball Hall of Fame. And I looked up to him just because I was really skinny and lanky, and he was really skinny and lanky throughout his career. So it kind of was like, similar body styles, Croatian descent. It just made sense. What's crazy about Tony is my rookie year was his last year in the NBA, and we played on the same team. So he was
That's cool.
Pretty much broken down at that point, had back issues and was struggling to move a little bit, but got one more year out, and it was my rookie year. So it it was pretty surreal to a guy that I was idolizing as a 12-year-old throughout the 90s, seeing play with MJ and knowing his whole history in the Euro League and everything, to then actually be able to be on a plane with him and a bus with him and pick his brain on things and talk to him and hear stories about the good old days, about teams of his that I followed was really, really cool.
I imagine, yeah, that's quite sentimental indeed. And that in some way may answer my next question, which was, there's a bit of a dichotomy in this one, which is, would you mind sharing perhaps one of your most difficult moments in the NBA, whether it was on the court, off the court, versus maybe one of the biggest wins? And it might not be the obvious, it might not be just winning that game, it might have been something small. But I always like to ask this question. I'm interested to know the things that stay with you as an athlete, because I think, we always forget what people say, what they do, but we never forget, how we feel in those moments.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my career, so being number one, I didn't set the world on fire my first year. I was consistent, wasn't horrible, wasn't great. Second year got better, third year got better again. Fourth year, so the 2009-10 season, had a career year, came out, played really, really well, made the All-NBA third team, which means you're top 15 in the whole league for that year. Our team was starting to get a little bit better, made the playoffs. And towards the end of that season, I catch an outlet pass and go for a dunk, get pushed, come off the rim, put my arm down, snap my elbow, basically 360'd it. And in that injury, broke my elbow, dislocated my elbow, broke my wrist, broke my index finger. And that was my shooting arm. It was a really, really tough injury because I was in career form, and it really took away from the way I play. Not using it as an excuse, it is what it is. And, had the surgeries, they're like, look, you're going to be out anywhere from 6 to 9 months, maybe more. And me being an idiot, I did it in March, and I was back on the floor in September. Stupidly, I didn't have full extension in my elbow at the time. Still don't have full extension to this day, but it was really, really bad. I couldn't, working with the physio, it's literally, you're biting a towel and they have to literally put it into extension, to work it. And then the problem is you go into extension this way, and then you can't get it back this way properly. Then it stops here, and then you got to force it back. So I was just doing that every day for, weeks and weeks and weeks. Come back and play. Still played okay, solid. But my touch was just gone. Like my touch was just not great. And I just struggled to get it back, lost confidence, shooting the ball. And my offensive game definitely took a step back. But the silver lining was I had a coach that was very defensive orientated, and he really taught me how to be an elite big man defender, that I then became one of the best defenders in the league, interior, rebounding, blocking shots, right place, right time type stuff. But that was probably the toughest thing. And told that, you're never going to be the same after that. And then I had another injury 2 years after that where I got undercut and snapped my ankle. Had to have like a microfracture type surgery, and doctors like, what's the timeline? They're like, we don't know. You might not make it back again, like to an elite level. Like you might not play again. So it was twice where I was told, like, you might not play again or be influential. And I was just stubborn. I was like, nah, I'm gonna disprove kind of their timeline for my injury. Like my mindset was always, if a doctor said you're going to be out 9 months, I'm going to beat it, because that's the only thing I could really focus on. Like, if you get an injury as an athlete, it's the worst, because you're out of the team structure. You miss the trips, the banter, this, that, the win-loss, the competitiveness. You're just on a bed, right? You feel sorry for yourself a little bit. So I always try to focus on like the next thing. Okay, so they've said 6 months, I'm going to make it 4 months. Let's get started, kind of thing. What can I do today? And the second part of your question was, the proudest part of that was that I beat two doctors basically saying, like, you might not play again, and got to 14 years.
Yeah, I love that. And I've noticed a bit of a common trend, with a lot of conversations I've had over the years. And I'm interested, I'm a curious soul, hence why I do this podcast. And I've drawn some trends, and that stubborn mentality often is what serves you well. And I think even being a coach, working with a lot of general population, if we can call people that, I don't think anyone's general, but, people who are not athletes, and then people who are athletes who get injuries. And I've sort of said, hey, okay, well, let's work with the surgeon, let's work with the doctor. What have they said? Any hard no's? And a lot of the time it's very vague. And the doctors and the surgeons, you would think, would have a lot of well-rounded knowledge, but they're very obviously acute, right? They're very focused on the injury and whatnot. And they're so in it that sometimes, they don't actually give you alternatives. And we go, well, actually, can we maybe, we can't do flexion. Can we do extension? We can't do rotation. So can we move for a transverse plane? We can't do impact, but can we do maybe stretching? And they go, oh, actually, if you're not doing this. And then like you did, you work around that. For good, better, or worse, it turns out, because it's like, I think the definitive thing is the psychology. You have said, no, I will not accept that, because if I do, therefore my career may be over. And also that's just a negative way of thinking, but I will give it my all, because then whatever happens, at least well, you know what, I give it 120%. And sure enough, the mind is, I think, stronger in the body in regards, and you've come back and perhaps worked on a different area of game. And then that shapes you, I think, as an athlete, which is interesting. I want to ask a bit of a middle ground question of those two, which is, do you have any funny moments that you've had in the NBA? Anything that's just left you in absolute tears going, that is brilliant, whether it was with teammates, on the road, off the road, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, that kind of just, even if you think about it, just brings a bit of a chuckle?
Oh, there's endless amounts. I've played with a lot of funny guys, a lot of different personalities. The best thing about the NBA is you've got guys from different countries, so there's different cultures, have different humor, different ways of telling jokes and all that kind of stuff. But I've told this story on my podcast before, but I had a teammate named Demir Markota, Croatian guy. It was my second year, and we had a coach that was, at the time, Terry Stotts was his name. He wasn't really a rah-rah coach, so he'd ever rarely get fired up and yell and scream and ever really do that. He maybe just, come on guys, what are we doing? But he'd ever rarely come in swearing or whatever, right? And we're playing in Orlando one night, and their old arena was really run down. The lockers were like, usually we have chairs, like nice, most arenas now have nice kind of reclining leather office chairs in each locker stall. Whereas the old arena was just like, they had the visiting locker room had just like hardwood benches, right? Like literally, and we're just, so we're getting smacked by Orlando at the time. They were pretty good, but we're getting smacked. We're down by like 30, 40 at halftime. And the way it works in the NBA is players will go to the locker room, the coaches will meet in their locker room first, and they'll discuss what's going on, this, that, and then they'll come in and address the players, maybe show a few clips on film. We need to do this better, but we'll get smashed. So Terry comes straight in pretty much. And you know when a coach comes straight in without meeting with his coaches, it's going to be a cuss out, right? And he's losing his shit. Like he's the first time you've seen him arc up, like, okay, like we need this, like this is good. And because he's yelling and screaming and swearing, and Demir Markoda farts like really loud. And because it was on the wooden benches, it was super loud. Like the thing echoed in the whole locker room. And it's right in the middle of the one time this coach is like finally nutted up and just gone crazy and swearing. And it was kind of good. I liked it. Like it's about time, right?
Yeah.
Someone's done that, right? So then he stopped mid-speech, looked at him, and he's like, "Did you just fart?" He's like, and he's got an, yes, coach, sorry, I could not hold in. And it was just hilarious. Like I still think back to it. And then speaking to Demir after was, he had like this kind of, he played this little game with teammates where he tried to fart, right? Loud enough just so his teammate could hear to make his teammate laugh. So then he gets in trouble by coach. Like he was doing, all these stupid bands he'd do in the locker room. But so the very next day they sent him down to the G League, which is the minor league, on a plane, and we didn't see him again until the end of the season. But that was probably one of the funniest stories that I've been a part of.
Yeah, that's you can't beat a fart, as my dad always says. It's just free entertainment, mate.
Just the timing of it. Like this poor coach never arcs up, and the one time he wanted to be taken seriously with a bit of swearing and firing up, and this guy just does that in the middle of his speech. Was just, the timing of it was impeccable.
Yeah, it sounds like that was a pretty he got some repercussions for it though. If you didn't see him to the end of the season, that was a bit rough.
Yeah, he was like fringe. He wasn't playing a lot anyway, and I guess they just thought, like, if you're going to be a dickhead, we're just going to send you off. So they sent him off to the G League, and then at the end of that season, he was back in Europe.
There you go. Funny stories. I love it. I always love hearing stuff about that. Before we get on to some rapid fire questions, Andrew, that I'd like to finish off the podcast, I actually wanted to ask you about what it's like being a father. Now that you've got your own kids, you're on the different end of the journey. What's changed the most about becoming a dad? I've got a lot of friends who are having kids, and they've said, Alex, it's one of the best things you'll ever do in your life. It's amazing. What's changed for you, and what are some of the best things about now being a dad and maybe watching your kids grow up and, play and do their things?
Yeah, I mean, it's been twofold. Like, so we had our first while I was still kind of playing. The hardest thing, for a professional athlete, we spoke about it a little bit before, like, we're selfish beings, right? You kind of have to be. It's my pre-game meal, it's my recovery, it's my massage time, I need all these things to get myself right for the game. So my wife's been really supportive of that before we had kids, knowing that, like, you screw up one of those things in the routine, you got to hear about it, right? And that's the unfortunate reality of being a professional athlete. It's very, very me driven. So then when you have kids, it's no longer about you. Like, and you got to make that transition as a professional athlete to now, not only while I was in my career, now retiring, it's all about your kids. It's not about you anymore. So that's been, I'm not going to lie, it was an adjustment the first year or two. With this pandemic hitting, being home a lot more has really, provided an opportunity for me to learn a lot about my kids, that I was still pretty, involved with my kids a lot when I come home from games and whatnot, but being on the day-to-day much more, and their quirks and this and that, which is usually left to mum because dad's out working or whatever it is, out traveling, and I'd be gone for 10-day road trips, to now seeing that stuff every day, I think is important. And they know, I don't think they realize how lucky they are to have, mum and dad that don't need to work right now and can be home all the time if they want to be. So that's been enjoyable, and just seeing them, grow into, they'll be growing into young boys and then teens and then young men. And we just hope we have them on the right path to be, great members of society and just be good people at the end of the day. So it's been a pretty exciting time. Like I said, our eldest just started school, so that's been an interesting journey, seeing the tears for the first week or two when you drop them off and all that kind of stuff. And my wife and I try to alternate who does it and just being more involved like that. But I've enjoyed it, and I'll continue to be hands-on as much as I can, because I'm real blessed to be able to do that. My father wasn't home a lot because he ran his own business. Like most working class families, you might see dad for 2 hours before bed and that's it. I'm in a fortunate position to be around a lot. So I really, really cherish that.
Mm. Yeah, I love that last bit and what you said about, you've got the opportunity to be with your kids. It's one of the reasons, people always say to me, you don't stop, Alex. I'm like, man, I really want to be able to, when I do have kids, and, you can't pick sometimes when those kids come along, like you said, you had your first one, you're still in the league, you're busy, you're doing this and that. But man, I would love to be able to have that opportunity to go, you know what? Oh yeah, you need to go to the game. Dad's going to be there. Mom's going to be there. I'm going to pick you up from school. Cause like you said, I grew up in the early days where, not my mom and dad have been great for me, but a lot of bosses that I've worked for, they're like, this is great. You can achieve this. And, I got my son, but I'm like, but you never see him. Like you just said, you get up, you wake him up and you put him to bed. I mean, for me, that's not the relationship you want. And like you said, if you've had that, maybe that's inspired you in some way to go, well, now like you said, you are grateful that you get to spend your time with your kids and you have the luxury, especially now with all of this nonsense that's going on, to be able to do that. So I think that's great.
It's not always that's the thing. Like some people don't have a choice. So like
yes.
My father didn't have a choice to, if he's at home playing with me, we're not eating, right? But there is, like you said, there's a lot of people in the corporate world and a lot of people that how much is enough, right? It's like do you really need to do 50 hours when you're a multi-millionaire? Maybe tone it down to 30 and spend some time with family. So I 100% agree with you. I see it a lot in the corporate world and even with professional athletes where I know, professional athletes that just don't want to retire because they don't want to go home and be there. And look, I'm not going to lie, it's taxing at times. Like being around two toddlers 24/7, like that'll test your merit and your marbles. There's no doubt about it. But there's a good and the bad. You got to kind of go through that kind of tough time sometimes with your kids where you're just like you've got a headache, they're doing your head in, and this one poos over here, this one does this one's got crayons on the wall, and they're not listening, and you're just like, you got to work through it, but you got to be there for them, right? Like you had the kids. If you don't want to go through that, don't have the kids. Like it's quite simple. And I hate seeing, see a lot in the industry of celebrities and sports stars where they're raised by the nanny, really, and it's like I never wanted to do that. Look, at times it'd be lovely for my wife and I to be able to go to dinner without the Rugrats and have 2 hours, and we have family that can sometimes help with that. But as far as having someone that's 20 hours a day is raising your child and they think that they're mum or dad, that's not me.
Yeah, I want respect for that, man, because like you said, there's a lot of people who outsource that as well. And it's that's, you don't outsource being a mum and dad. I don't think so. And then you see, the way they grow up and they go, oh, it's like, well, you weren't there. you didn't have an influence, so it's not a bad kid.
Yeah, it's not a shock. Like you could see it happening miles away, and then it's like, oh, they got drug problems or they got this problems or they blah blah blah. It's like, no shit, like they don't know who you are. Like, yeah.
It's probably my most difficult conversation when I'm coaching, people in the corporate world and professional athletes. And, there's me, at least now 30 years old with some life experience going, hey, I'm not telling you how to suck eggs, but your health is going down the shit pan and you're coming to me, but you're defeating the purpose because you're trying to build a life for the family, but you're destroying the whole thing because by the time you get there, now you can't enjoy it because your health's down the swanny and you don't even spend time with the kids and you don't get that time back. And, some people just need a slap in the face sometimes, professionally speaking.
Or just don't have kids.
Yeah, well, exactly. Like you said, that option is always on the table now.
Yeah.
Especially more than ever. But before we wrap up, Andrew, just a couple of rapid fire questions. They're a bit fun, lighthearted in nature before my final one. So my first one is, what's your favorite food? You've got one last meal. You can have entree, dinner, dessert. What you go to, my man? What do you like?
Most likely it'll be penne alla vodka, pink sauce. Cook it myself. Big fan of Italian. I like making all my sauces fresh from scratch. I haven't got to the point where I want to make the pasta from scratch just because it makes a big mess. I'm a big fan of pasta. Also an old Croatian recipe called essentially semolina dumplings. It's kind of a quote unquote peasant food from my family that didn't have a whole lot of money. So it's basically, back in the day in Croatia, it was made from semolina, which is a type of flour, egg, olive oil dropped in boiling water with the chicken stock, and that's your meal. So very, very simple, very easy, but a comfort food for me that my grandma used to make a lot for me. I know how to make it myself as well, and another one that I enjoy.
Yeah, that's just great. It's great when it's got a bit of sentiment to it as well. I resonate. My mom's Italian. It's the best. I mean, it's the best cuisine. It's peasant food, like you said, but you can't beat it. You cannot beat it. If you choose a superpower and you can make one up, there's no rules here. What would you choose? And for example, to give you an idea, everyone goes off flying. Well, that's great. That's good. And you can choose that. But then some people go the power to absorb pain, and take it away. So you're like, you know what I mean? Like, feel free. You've got anything, but whatever kind of comes to mind.
Well, flying will be the first one, obviously. Because I hate flying on an airplane as it is. So that'd be the easiest one. But oh man, it's a tough one. Otherwise, whew. Yeah, I mean, somewhere teleporting probably would be the good one for me. Just be like, hey, I want to be in Croatia tomorrow for a holiday. Bang, I'm there. Problem is you couldn't bring people with you because they couldn't teleport. But something along those lines, just to make conveniences easier. But as far as like living forever and all that kind of stuff, nah. I just like to get places faster. Would be my number one. The Flash, maybe.
Yeah, I'd say that'd be pretty darn good as well. And one of my last questions, a little bit more sentimental in nature. I ask every single guest this, and it's interesting because there seems to be the same answer, which you probably will discover in a moment, but it might be different, which is, could you identify a fear that you've had in your life? Might be one that you're living right now, could be one in the past, what that fear was or is, and what you have learned or are learning from overcoming that fear.
Well, I mean, I would say I still have the fear, but not fear of flying, but like when there's turbulence, I can't stand it. And the reason why is I never had an issue with flying ever. And our plane almost went down twice my rookie year. We had one where an engine blew above Lake Michigan mid-flight, heard the big bang. We've all got noise cancellation headphones on, heard the big bang, emergency landing. Oh. And then the second one was we took off and the engine caught on fire. And what's funny about that story is they didn't de-ice the plane properly. And then we radioed back in to go back to the airport in Newark, New Jersey. And the guy in the tower was like, oh yeah, I saw some sparks coming out of your engines. Like, well, why did you radio the pilot? So anyway, those two we almost went down. And funny enough, Tony Kukoc used to sit next to the window. And guys used to laugh at him because he used to look outside the window the whole flight because he wasn't a great flyer, and he almost went down with the Chicago Bulls back in the day. And we used to kind of like, oh, what's wrong with him? We'll be fine. I'm now that guy. So turbulence comes, like I'm strapping on the seatbelt. So I wouldn't say it's a full fear, but I don't enjoy it. And I guess, probably knowing that I can't control a situation doesn't help. One of those people, the OCD of like, it's out of my control. Oh shit. Like, and then once I really think about it, I'm like, yeah, it's out of my control. If we're going down, we're going down, So, just kind of got over that. Which, there was a 2 or 3 year period there where I wasn't great with it, but, I'm all good now.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when you've had those instances, they can certainly rattle the cage. It's like people who are bitten by a dog when you're young, you sort of go, oh, you're a little bit, how you doing? But then it just leaves you with that. So if you could leave the audience with, and before we do some social links, if you had to just give one bit of advice that would improve everyone's life every day, can be relevant to your career or not, what would you leave people with?
Take your phone out of the bedroom. Yeah. So I'm not the best. I'm on my phone a lot, but I like to read a lot. So I don't think it's all bad. I like to go on socials a little bit, but I actually read a lot. Papers, citations on things, even stuff with COVID, like new findings from studies. I like to read. I like to think I'm pretty well versed in a lot of just random topics rather than just an expert on one. But one thing I started to do about a year ago was leave my phone whenever it's at 8, 9 o'clock, whenever I'm going downstairs, I leave my phone upstairs on the charger and I don't touch it till the morning, and just try to watch a show with the wife or talk or whatever. And I think that, I still have a ways to go during the day. There's times where I'm on it too much. But unfortunately with podcasting and all that, it kind of goes with the grain. But yeah, I think that's one thing for people. I think that can really help. And I think your partner sleeps better. You can actually talk to your wife, which is a good thing at times, or your partner. And I think that's one piece of advice I'd give.
Yeah, love it. I think that's tremendously valuable. Andrew, really appreciate your time. Really appreciate you sharing your insights. For people who want to follow along with yourself on social, but also your podcast as well, where are the best places for people to find you?
Yeah, Andrew Bogut on all the socials. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, pretty easy to find. When Instagram doesn't censor me, they shadow ban me a fair bit. So you say things that they don't like. And at Rogue Bogues, so at Rogue Bogues, on all Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all good podcast platforms. So there's a bunch of different stuff I do on my podcast. We do a basketball show. We do a kind of current political topic show. We do a car chat, passionate about muscle cars and old school cars. So there's a bunch of stuff on there, something for everyone. So check that out and give it a follow and listen. I'm sure there'll be something there that you'll either love or hate. We do have a lot of hate listeners too, which is good. So you need a good balance.
Yeah, you do. That's what is it now? Any news is good news, or whatever it is, any exposure. And as ever, I'll put all the links, guys, in the show notes below. So whether you're listening or watching on Spotify or podcast or YouTube, it'll be in there. We didn't get to talk about muscle cars, maybe one for the future, because that is a big passion as well. I do love cars and whatnot. But guys, as ever, you already know, like, comment, subscribe, leave a rating and a review. And of course, we'll see you in the next time. And until then, stay fearless. Andrew, thanks for your time.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
For those of you who are confused, frustrated, and sick and tired of not seeing the results that you want or deserve, make sure that you click the Apply for Coaching button in the description below and line up a completely free consultation with myself, where we can discover if it's a good fit as client and coach and take your health and physique to the next level once and for all.